The Manson family is a fascinating one, right? Because I know that you have studied Jolly West and the whole MKUltra program and what they were experimenting with psychedelic drugs and cults and mind control. What is your perspective on why they were doing that? Why Jolly West was involved? Why were they involved? What do you think was the initial motivation to sort of pursue mind control studies, the federal government?
Yeah. I think the initial motivation was a kind of national internal emergency, national security emergency that emerged right after World War II, actually at the beginning of the Korean War, when U.S. pilots were coming back or were shown confessing to having flown germ warfare missions over China, and then many POWs were coming back and seemed to have been converted to communism or have been concerningly affected by something that was seen as brainwashing. So many of the soldiers coming back seem to have been brainwashed or have collaborated to some degree when they were held as prisoners. And then there were 21 U.S. POWs who elected to stay in China. And this really was a disturbing, they all had a chance to choose when they were in the UN camps after they'd been held prisoner for 4 years or so. And 21 of them decided that they'd like to try their lot in China. And so this caused this kind of collective, this caused a crisis of, did the communists possess a super weapon of some kind that no other war. There was even a famous article in the New Yorker that said something new in history, that there was some capacity that this ideological system had, the communists had, that was somehow rendering Americans powerless against it. So this was kind of the crisis of mind control, and MKUltra was an attempt to basically reverse engineer what this was. So Jolly West was one of the first people. He was in charge of studying the brainwashed pilots initially, and that's how he.
What year was this?
That was in 1952. But he also before that he was involved. I mean, he had been trained to some degree with. He was trained by Harold Wolff, who was at Cornell. He had done his residency at Cornell with Dr. Harold Wolff, who is a world neurologist, a world expert in migraine and basically the type of pain that comes from migraine. So you could say he was an expert in the fear pain cycle. And he had CIA connections from even before MKUltra was started.
So what did they determine the Chinese were doing?
So they determined, West wrote a paper in 1957, and the part that was published in a journal called Sociometry described he described it as DDD, or debility, dependency, and dread. And he said basically these camps were systematically inducing a state of debility, which was that soldiers were starved and basically worn down. They were deprived of medical care. This is also in the historical record. Something I studied extensively is that, men were marched in, for example, the Tiger Death March north of the Yalu River from the war, where they'd been captured. And by the time they got there, they'd often lost half their body weight. They had been bombed by their own forces at night. They sometimes, they had to pour the blood out of their boots every morning just to keep going and not be. Anyone who stopped would be shot. So by the time they got to the camps, they were really worn down. And a missionary who passed them in a train at that time wrote or described in an oral history that he didn't recognize them as Americans, that they were the most bedraggled. It was just they were in a terrible state. And so debility was the first thing West described when he was extracting what had happened. Dependency was, later there was a layer added in which the POWs were dependent for if they were going to survive, they required, the camp leaders would provide it, so it made them very dependent. And they also engaged in very formal Maoist thought reform with the men as a kind of experiment. And the third part was dread, which was just the idea that you could be killed at any time, or perhaps your family could be, because they threatened
Maoist thought reform?
Yeah, in the POW camps, the Chinese, once the Chinese took over from the Koreans running the camps, because they decided, I think it was almost a formal experiment, at least that's how it looks to me. I don't think West wrote about this, but in my own research on the camps, it transpires that they wanted to see, because Mao believed that thought reform would work on anybody, not just on Chinese people, not just on Chinese peasants. He felt that only something like 7 to 8% of the human population was unreformable, and those people would be disposed of. But he wanted to check if these American soldiers would also be susceptible to re-education. So they really did a formal, 3-part re-education program on them. And men had many different responses to it. But when West met them, he studied many of the returning men when they came back to Lackland Air Force Base, and he extracted those three components of what had happened to them, DDD, and that's the way he became an expert on what he called brainwashing or coercive persuasion.
So you brought up MKUltra.
Yes.
MKUltra was a government program run by the Central Intelligence Agency, originally started as something called Bluebird in 1948-49, morphed into Artichoke, and then in 1952 became MKUltra. It was a mind control program, a brainwashing program. The CIA was trying to learn how to control people's behavior without their knowledge. Now, this all came out in Senate and congressional hearings in the 70s. It was exposed, but nobody knew about it until 1974, when Seymour Hersh, the New York Times reporter, reported it on the front page of the paper. So their main objective was to create what they called hypno-programmed assassins, people who would kill on command, popularly known as Manchurian Candidates, after a book that was written in 1962 and later became a movie and then a movie again. The people would be, through drugs and hypnotism, the objective was to get people to go and commit an act of murder against their moral code and have no memory of their programming, and be amnesic even of the act after the fact often. That was just that was their main goal, but they were also trying to create couriers, people, military people that they could implant messages, send them, across dangerous areas where there were, at that time it was the Vietnam War, and deliver messages and then have them wiped from their memory in case they were captured. They had all kinds of objectives. So Roger Smith was supervising Manson when he became he was able to do exactly what the MKUltra program had been trying to create and do for, at that point, about 15, 17 years. When it was all exposed in the 70s, and there were these hearings, first the Rockefeller Commission hearings and the church hearings, and then finally Senators Ted Kennedy and Daniel Inouye held hearings. The CIA admitted that they had done this, but no one would say exactly what they did. All the records had been destroyed when the two people who ran it, Richard Helms, who had become the director of the CIA in the 60s, and Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, who was kind of the mad scientist who had supervised they had safe houses in San Francisco, New York, Los Angeles, where they would experiment on people that were lured into these apartments and houses that were either look like brothels or hippie communes or whatever. And the people who were working at the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic that was run by another Smith, which makes it a little confusing, but Dr. David Smith, who founded it, he had given an office to a scientist named Jolly West, Louis J. West, who was, when the hearings occurred in the 70s, identified as a top MKUltra researcher. He was an academic, come out of the military, had been at the University of Oklahoma, sorry, and then UCLA running the psychiatric divisions. He denied ever being involved in MKUltra. And this was one of the moments, I think it was 2001, when, things really kind of shook the course of my reporting. Was I learned that West had been at the same place that Manson was in the Haight in the summer that Manson became exactly what the CIA was trying to create. And I knew, actually, I'd interviewed West about 7 years before for a story I did about celebrity stalkers and people who were obsessed with stars and then only to kill them or try to kill them. And he was an expert in violence, hypnotism, brainwashing, and he was the chair of the psychiatry department at UCLA at that point. He was dead when his name came up in the Manson story, and there wasn't a lot of, I guess there was a lot of Google then, or a little bit, but when I did a little research, I found out that there had been these allegations that he'd been involved in MKUltra. He always denied it. He was never prosecuted, never even investigated. He went to his grave threatening to sue anybody that said he would have anything to do with this kind of a program. Again, through another long story, but I got access to his files, which had been left at UCLA, and they had never been processed when I called. And when I made the request, it took them 2 or 3 months to process the papers. I went through them through the whole summer looking for a needle in a haystack, and it was intuition, gut. I just thought there might be something there, and sure enough, I eventually found it. It was correspondence between Jolly West and Sidney Gottlieb, the doctor that ran MKUltra, beginning in 1953, about conducting experiments on people without their knowledge to get them to have amnesia of the acts after they were programmed, and everything that he had been accused of and denied, he did. Not only did he do it, he created the blueprint for the whole program with Gottlieb. The fact that all these kind of interesting research programs merged at the Haight, at the clinic, and then Manson came out of it with the power to do exactly what the MKUltra had been trying to create for up to that point, I thought was worth investigating further, and that's why I kept going and going and going.
Did you get a chance to look at that Chaos book that I told you about?
Yeah.
Tom O'Neill, who is a friend of my good friend Greg Fitzsimmons, wrote an insane book that took him 20 years about Manson and the CIA and LSD. And what did you think about all that?
Well, you've touched on some. Or Tom touched on some really interesting things that. What I liked about his book, and I went through it, I read it, is that he's actually, I think, very honest about the shortcomings, right, of what he ended up doing, right, and the research that he went through, and where he couldn't draw connections. So I give him a lot of credit. I think it's well worth the read, and. It's a hell of just a personal story that it took him this fucking long, right, to make his way through in a variety of reasons. But
luckily, it's been a tremendous success.
Yeah.
It's really he sold out almost immediately, and the paperbacks are sold out too. Manson
they're reprinting
it.
It's a huge draw, right?
It is but it's also
yeah.
It's a fantastic account of all the things that happened with the Manson family and all those people that were alive back then, about how this guy kept getting out of jail, and they kept arresting him, and they kept saying, this is above my pay grade, and they would let him out.
Yeah, and that's for me, that's the strangest part about the whole story, right? This idea that, was Manson, a lab rat for the CIA, and, how far down that rabbit hole do you want to go? Well, O'Neill is pretty clear about that, right? That's not a particularly solid connection. It's a tenuous connection, I think he called it, between one of what used to be a contractor, a researcher for that old chestnut MKUltra.
Jolly West.
Yeah, Jolly West, yeah.
What did you think about all that? Like, I'm sure you know about Operation Midnight Climax and all the stuff that's absolutely true.
Yeah, I don't know. It'd be interesting to know how many people are aware. I know some people that, that's just what they do.
Let's explain Midnight Climax.
Yeah.
Operation Midnight Climax was a CIA-funded program where they dosed up Johns. They created brothels, and dosed up Johns with LSD against their knowledge.
Yeah.
And without their knowledge, and let them fornicate and have a good old time with these ladies of the evening.
Man,
and,
my God.
and watched them and filmed them and studied them.
I know. When you say it that way, I'm in if you want money to produce that movie. But it's it is actually, yeah, it's true. Look, it fell under the sort of umbrella of this MKUltra, which is public knowledge. I'm not, obviously we're not talking that term.
Well, let's also give them the benefit of the doubt. When LSD was synthesized by Albert Hoffman, they really needed to figure out what the fuck this was. And they need to figure out, like, could this be used against Americans? Could this be used against the president? Like, What is this? Is this a truth serum? Like, what are the benefits? What's the pros and cons? And what are the dangers of this stuff?
Well, and that's
from a national security angle, it's very important that they did study it.
Right, and so from context, and again, we talked about that towards the beginning, is which is something we don't normally do, right? So we're judging people from history now,
right.
And so we're not using context of what was the what were the conditions?
We're talking about the 1950s, the 1960s.
Well, late 40s even.
Right.
I mean, so what have you got? You got the end of the World War II. You got the Cold War. It's the late 40s. You've got the Soviet Union that is heavily invested in a variety of experiments. Mind control, brainwashing was the sort of the term of the culture, right? And brainwashing was a big issue. Not a big issue, but it captured people's imagination back then. So the late 40s, early 50s, it was the Korean War. We had an existential threat, right? We had nukes pointed at each other. We had, drills in schools, kids hiding under desks. I mean, what the fuck? So with the fear that the Chinese or the Soviets were going to develop mind control abilities was pervasive. And I know, you talk about it now and everybody rolls their eyes and goes, oh my God. But you're absolutely right that you have to understand the context with which then Alan Dulles, who was at the time, the director of the CIA.
By the way, the guy who Kennedy fired.
Yes.
And wound up being a part of the Warren Commission after Kennedy was murdered, which was very strange.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Keep going.
Oh, I like that. I like where that could go. So anyway, we got Alan Dulles, who in '53, early in '53, says, "All right, we have to understand what the Soviets are doing, particularly the Soviets. But we also had, again, I'm sure some folks listening know all this, but a lot of folks probably don't. We had POWs returning, American POWs returning from Korea. That was a big issue, right? Because some of them came back, again, quote unquote, brainwashed, and some of them didn't want to return because, again, brainwashing, mind control that, perhaps the Chinese had developed these techniques. So initially the idea was defensive. How do we protect ourselves against this new threat within this Cold War, against these enemies who appear to be devoting a great deal of resources against this? Well, so initially it started out as a defensive effort. MKUltra was the umbrella name for a whole bunch, over 140 projects, sub-projects underneath MKUltra. And it was all based around chemical substances, use of chemicals, use of drugs, behavioral issues with human beings, creating false memories, deleting memory, influencing the behavior, again, of individuals. There were a variety of projects that fell under this MKUltra, and it was, again, starting out as a defensive issue, but then quickly became sort of an offense.
There was some sort of a CIA program where they were... Explain how they did it. They infiltrated these hippie communities, and they allowed Charles Manson over and over and over again to get out of jail. Yeah. They knew that he was committing all these crimes, and instead of incarcerating him...
we have to be careful when we say they.
Who's they?
Yeah, we have to kind of break it all down.
Let's break it all down.
One of the other things I found out that was very significant was that Manson had a parole officer, his first parole officer, who kind of had given him a get-out-of-jail-free card for the first year after Manson was released from prison.
This was Smith?
Roger Smith, yeah. And he was a criminologist in the Bay Area. Manson violated his parole the day that he was released in Los Angeles. And this is one of the, you'd think it's a little lie, but it's an important lie that Vince Bugliosi presented, not just at trial, but also in his book. At trial, it's much more serious. He changed the narrative. He said Manson had been given permission to travel to San Francisco from L.A. when Manson was paroled. Manson hadn't been given that permission. He just showed up there. They originally were going to violate him, send him right back to prison, and someone stepped in and took care of that and let Manson stay in San Francisco, and he was assigned to Roger Smith. It took about a year and a half, but through a Freedom of Information Act process, I got his federal parole file. And those were the kind of seeds of how I found out that Manson had this immunity from prosecution for the 2 years he was out of prison from 67 until the murders occurred in the summer of 69.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but who was Smith doing this for? Who was giving him the instructions to continue to let Manson out and to continue to monitor him?
Well, that's the problem. I didn't get the whole file, and the file I got had redactions. He would report to the head office, and they would give him instructions, and then he would violate those instructions, and there'd be no repercussions for him or for Manson. For instance, Manson was arrested in July of 1967, 3 or 4 months after he got out of prison, when he was under Roger Smith's supervision, for interfering with an officer who was trying to arrest one of his first young followers, Ruth Ann Morehouse, who was 15. And he was put in jail, pled out, so he got a 3-day sentence, a new probation sentence as well, and all that was hidden. Like, it's not in Bugliosi's book. The parole officer, Roger Smith, a week later wrote to the head office that Manson was doing fine, and he actually recommended that Manson be allowed to go to Mexico and work in Mexico. And the head parole office in the United States, since it's federal, wrote back and they said, that's insane. He was the job that he was going to do in Mexico was surveying soil for insecticides. I mean, it had nothing to do with, and I have all these documents showing this.
Who was hiring him, Charles Manson, to survey soil?
It was a company in Nevada which disappeared a couple years later.
Many homeowners are afraid that they will be part of the unhappy group that suffers from overcharged prices, subpar workmanship, or an unfinished renovation, even though the majority of people manage to get through the hassle and spend less money in the end and appreciate the results. The do-it-yourself couple focused on the basement after remodeling the major living areas on the first and second stories. It was a simple enough start to the basement improvements. Despite the presence of some graffiti on the basement walls, the homeowners remained unfazed and unaware that something frightening might be concealed beneath their feet. The homeowner kept going, documenting his house remodeling endeavor with images as he went along. As he began chipping away at the walls, he uncovered unassuming graffiti splattered across the basement. He didn't take much notice of the widespread colors surrounding him. The homeowner continued with his work, cleaning the area before he began hammering through it and documenting every step of the way with a camera on hand. Upon taking it upon himself to begin the arduous work of ripping down the ceiling, he partially destroyed some walls. Between the flooring and the ceiling, something was concealed. He went to take a closer look, but the object was placed incredibly well between the rafters. With some strength and a lot of courage, he grabbed onto the object and pulled it towards him. He soon noticed that this massive bulk was a suitcase, a vintage green and grey bag that had been left here for no one to find. For some reason, he felt apprehensive about it, so he contacted his wife and patiently awaited her arrival. What on earth might be inside the old luggage if someone had gone to such extremes to conceal it for all these years? As he patiently awaited his wife's arrival, he began to examine the bag and was slightly taken aback by its weight. Whatever secrets were within the little luggage had to have been enormous. The fact that the luggage was so discreetly concealed led him to speculate that it may contain valuable or important possessions for someone. He couldn't help but wonder what might be inside this old bag. He was getting impatient. As soon as his wife arrived, he explained everything in excitement. It felt like Christmas to open something they knew nothing about. Together, they opened the case, but at first, nothing seemed to be off. Inside the case, were bundles of wax paper that wrapped something rectangular. They were still in the dark as to the contents and good fortune contained within this small bag. But when they took out the bundles, everything made sense. After that, the homeowners proceeded to remove the wax paper layers that concealed the enigmatic item. As he started to remove the paper, it became increasingly clear that he was actually staring at money, and that was only the first bundle. Unwrapping it revealed a mountain of $20. Further inspection revealed that, much to their astonishment, these bills were all old money. These are all 20s. There may be a couple thousand here. We are freaking out at this point, the man later told newspapers. This doesn't happen to us. What do we do? Where are the cameras? Eagerly, they started unwrapping the rest of the bundles. Would they contain the same as the first one? Or could there be something in there even more valuable? In wonder, the couple beheld the bundles. They were crossing their fingers that the second, third, and fourth bundles would be as lucky as the first. They began enthusiastically removing the wax paper layers. But they didn't contain $20 bills. Instead, they were full of $50 bills and $100 bills. The second package didn't have any 20s. It was all 50s. What is going on here? There could be $5,000 here. Wait, the third package is 100s. This is out of control. The man described later. Their minds were brimming with inquiries. What gave rise to all of this? It was obvious that the bills were from a bygone era, perhaps the 1920s or 1930s. For what amount of time had this suitcase been stashed away in their home? And more importantly, how much could all this old money be worth? Upon further investigation, it was clear to the homeowners that everything, from the suitcase to the contents within, was very old. Their curiosity, though, was piqued. Once they removed the packages from the bag, they discovered an additional surprise that would provide answers to some of their fascinating inquiries. At the very base of the bag, there was a flattened newspaper with the date March 25th, 1951. Not only that, but it was the local newspaper of their own hometown, Cleveland. They were both thrilled and taken aback by the wonderful discovery they had made, but would the money have any value in today's market? Is there anything more this basement might be concealing? It was a windfall that the pair couldn't believe. There were certain banknotes in the bundles that were considered stables, which meant they were never traded. Plus, none of them were from less than 70 years ago. What a fantastic discovery. They were so shocked and taken aback that they sought legal counsel to help them assert the value of their treasure. The lawyer admitted that all the money that was found in the suitcase was roughly worth $23,000. The homeowners couldn't believe it. This was a wild ride for us, and I hope you all enjoyed it too, the man would write as he posted his pictures on Reddit. We are boring people and have been dumping our extra money to pay off our mortgage, and that is where this money will go to. The entire procedure had been photographed by the man. As he posted his last image on the internet, he didn't know that this wouldn't be the last of their surprises. Their interest intensified. What more secrets did their walls conceal? A frightening new secret was unearthed by the homeowners not long after, prompting them to call the FBI for assistance. The homeowners were aware that they could not abandon their partially renovated basement and so had to press on with the renovations. Unbeknownst to them, the stack of money wasn't the only surprise they would find. A second case concealed between the rafters became apparent to the do-it-yourselfer the moment he resumed destroying more of his ceiling. Could it be true? What would this suitcase contain, and what else did their mystery house carry within it? Because he was sure it contained something valuable, he patiently awaited his wife's return home so they could share the joy of opening it. Examining this new case against the last one, they both were seemingly identical. That this bag held the same items as the last one is totally within the realm of possibility, isn't it? The duo wasted no time in revealing the case's contents. They had high expectations for the second one because they had already discovered the valuable treasure it contained. However, the contents of this new suitcase were different. No wax-wrapped wads of cash were found. Rather, the case was neatly stacked with cash. They both gasped. How much money was in this case? And what other surprises were they going to be subject to? The second bag had a larger windfall than the first. It seemed unbelievable to the couple. They couldn't believe their good fortune. All of it was valued at $45,000, according to the second appraisal they had. Even though they were taken aback and amazed once again, the homeowners were adamant about finishing their improvements and using the extra funds to make their home remodeling even better. They kept digging in the basement, but something kept making them wonder. What else might this house be hiding? The time will come when they find out and must contact the FBI. Knowing that their home held important mysteries, the couple felt compelled to investigate. Their motivation grew bigger when they knew where they had to look next. Behind a secret door that the realtor told them housed the water heater. They had a gut feeling that this was a perfect hiding place for anything small in size and big in value. They decided to look behind the door, but to their excitement, discovered their home's biggest secret yet. Upon opening the little white door, the couple discovered that the realtor had been obviously deceiving them. Instead of a utility room concealed behind the door, there was a spacious room that could easily be converted into an additional living area. Parts of the mysterious room's flooring were carpeted, although the condition of the carpet was obviously awful. One thing was crystal clear. This room had been utilized, and someone had gone to tremendous efforts to conceal it. The place had an ominous, musty stench. This room had remained unknown to the couple throughout their many years of residency in the house. A sense of unease washed over him, and he ordered his wife to remain outside the room as he investigated it. As he began looking, he discovered something even more mysterious. Another door. But this door was no ordinary one. It was highly secured with heavy locks. Who would knowingly conceal something to such a degree? Knowing more about his own house was essential for the do-it-yourselfer that he is. The building he had been residing in was shrouded in secrecy and deceit. He took a hammer and set out to break the heavily guarded door. At this point, he would not be thwarted by locks or heavy-duty security. He had to know. His determination to understand more led him to another shocking discovery. Could it be more treasure? More money? But somewhere that has hiding places surely must have something awry. A once enjoyed home improvement project took a dark turn when the man cracked the latch and peered inside. At the back of the room, concealed by a thick layer of soundproofing material and a white plastic tarp, was another door. The room didn't feel right. It felt like something from out of a movie, torture chamber perhaps. However, as they persisted in searching in the incorrect spots, they discovered further secrets that their house held, which would provide light on the room's peculiar history. As they combed through the room's antiques, they realized they needed to contact the authorities immediately. An old brown briefcase was the first weird item the pair found as they explored the room. They were crossing their fingers that their good fortune continued from their previous 2 bag finds. However, when they surveyed the room, it became immediately apparent that whatever was inside this bag could not have been good. Soon enough, the pair would learn the truth. They wanted to save these moments for all time, so they kept taking pictures and documenting what they found, just like he did in the basement. After what seemed like an eternity of waiting, they cracked open the briefcase and had a peek inside. There were several precious artifacts within the case, including antique jewelry, a ring, and 4 silver ingots. Things belonging to someone were found in the case, including envelopes containing money from various international nations. Why were all these priceless artifacts stashed away in this room? They sensed that there might be even more secrets concealed within this chamber of intrigue, and their assessment was correct. In the course of their investigation, they discovered a black sentry safe concealed in the room's corner. At this point, they are doubtful. Now they have become skeptical. How could it be that a room within a room had a secret safe? Everything was so shrouded in secrecy and mystery that it frightened the man. He had complete faith that the safe would not hold any common belongings. such as cash or watches. Whatever was within the safe was sure to terrify him. Leaving his strange thoughts apart, he forced his way into the safe. As soon as it opened, he saw a note that confirmed everything the man suspected. The words, "Save yourself," were horrifying enough, but the note's sloppy writing in black ink further added to the eerie atmosphere. What was this note? Was it a warning? If he wanted to find out what happened, the man understood he had to keep looking. However, the pair discovered further mysterious objects that were outside their control shortly after this revelation. The need to involve the police was apparent to them. Intrigued, the man dug deeper into the contents of the safe, but what he found next would make him worry even more. Inside the safe was a couple of tapes with a handwritten note marked on the safe which read, "Do not." The tapes seemed to be a series of videotapes. He knew the truth that he was seeking would surely be on those tapes. What would they reveal? Carefully, the man removed each tape and examined it in further detail. Surprisingly, compared to the other relics he had discovered, the recordings appeared to be much more recent. This scared him, but they revealed little else. On top of the tapes were a series of numbers which seemed to be labels, but one tape in particular did not have a label on it of any kind. Out of 6 tapes, 5 had tags. Was this all a game set up by the previous homeowner? They knew that this was all too much for them. They were in over their heads and needed to call the police. The homeowner's insatiable curiosity led him to quickly decipher the contents of those cassettes. He just gave them a brief glance before he contacted the police and demanded that they arrive at his house immediately. The FBI wasted little time seizing the tapes, and no one knows what was on them. Except for the homeowner, the FBI, and whoever made them. The man's curiosity led him to find something he certainly wished he hadn't. What did the secret recordings contain? Maybe we'll never find out. The media has made wild assumptions about the contents of the tapes, claiming they show horrifying murders committed in the enigmatic soundproof room. However, the subject remains unanswered. What exactly was recorded on the tapes? The investigation the homeowners had done on their homes raised a lot of questions regarding the connection between the money found in the cases and the tapes. What was this home's past, and what other hidden mysteries could it contain? Matter of fact, what would you do if you found money or mysterious artifacts hiding within the walls of your house? More importantly, is it safe to state that you have a thorough understanding of your home and everything in it? Meanwhile, a builder's good fortune turned out to be cursed when he found a large sum of money concealed within the walls of a property he was renovating. While removing plaster from the bathroom wall studs, Kits discovered $182,000 worth of money concealed in boxes and wrapped in pre-WWY Cleveland Plain Dealer news articles. The money was in such good condition, and some of the bills were so rare and collectible that one currency appraiser valued the treasure at up to $500,000. There was one problem though. The walls from which Kits pulled the money aren't his walls. The house isn't his house. Whose money is it exactly? No one knows for sure. But how to share? The homeowner offered 10%. He wanted 40%. Then things went sour from there. A month after the plain dealer reported on the case in December 2007, Dunn's estate got involved, suing for the right to the money. However, Kits asserted ownership over it. Together with his attorney, he resurrected a common law finders keepers provision, known as a treasure trove from the past, in the hopes of establishing his superior claim to the fortune. The attorney for Kits had planned to sue Amanda Reese, the homeowner, in the hopes that she would either give up the money she had held or split it with him. The windfall discovery amounted to little more than grief for contractor Bob Kits, who couldn't agree on how to split the money with homeowner Amanda Reese. It didn't help Reese much either. A bank had lately foreclosed on one of her properties, and she was contemplating bankruptcy, according to her deposition testimony. And just a small portion of the loot will go to the 21 direct descendants of Patrick Dunn, the rich businessman who squirreled away the newly minted cash during a period of widespread unemployment and bank failures. If these two individuals had sat down and resolved their disputes and divided the money, the heirs would have had no knowledge of it, said attorney Gid Marcinkovicius, who represents the Dunn estate. Because they were not able to sit down and divide it in a rational way, they both lost. Thanks for watching another episode of Voyager. While you're still here, make sure to click the video on your screen for more mind-blowing videos about space.